You know, an old-timer once told me that the deepest changes aren't always the loudest. They don't always come with a bang or a headline that screams from the front page. Sometimes they arrive with the quiet turning of a tractor's key or the crinkle of a ration book. They are the slow, grinding shifts that happen in the background, altering the very foundation of our world while we're all looking somewhere else. What if I told you that the last true harvest, the final chapter of a way of life that had lasted 1,000 years, wasn't taken by a storm or a drought, but by a war? A world war that demanded not just soldiers, but the very soil itself. This is the story of how the dinner table drafted the farm into service, and in doing so, rewrote the rules of how we eat, how we live, and how we think about the land. After this, nothing was ever the same again. Before we begin, a quick note. This video is for historical and educational purposes only. We do not provide instructions or encourage any unsafe practices. We're simply looking back at a pivotal moment in our shared story, a moment whose echoes are still felt today. Now, to understand what was lost, we have to first picture what was. Close your eyes for a moment. Well, keep them open for the footage, but you get the idea. Picture the American and European countryside before the war. Not a postcard, but the real thing, the living, breathing landscape. It was a patchwork, a glorious, messy, biodiverse quilt of small to medium-sized farms. From the air, it wouldn't look like the vast, uniform green and gold carpets of today. It would be a mosaic of shapes and shades, bordered by hedgerows and trees. On a single farm, you'd likely find a bit of everything. A few dairy cows chewing their cud, their milk destined for the family table or the local creamery. A flock of chickens scratching in the yard, providing eggs and pest control. A pen of hogs, fattened on scraps and surplus. Fields rotated between corn one year, then oats, then maybe clover or alfalfa to nourish the soil. A practice as old as farming itself. And the work? It was human, an animal. It was the sweat of a man behind a horse-drawn plow, feeling the soil texture through the rains, understanding its resistance, its readiness. It was the rhythmic swish of a scythe at dawn, cutting hay with a skill passed down through generations. It was the calloused hands of his wife and children weeding the kitchen garden, tending the hens and helping with the harvest. This wasn't just a business. It was an ecosystem, a family economy, and a calendar governed by the sun and the seasons, not by a bank loan or a futures market. It was resilient in its own way. If the wheat had a bad year due to rust, maybe the potatoes did all right. If the egg market dipped, there was still milk and pork. It was a system of checks and balances worked out over generations, a living insurance policy against the whims of nature, and the knowledge. It wasn't from a university textbook or a government pamphlet. It was stored in the stories of grandfathers, in the dog-eared almanac on the shelf, in the farmer's own sense of the land he'd walked since he was a boy. He knew which field held water after a spring rain, which corner of the barn was drafty, which apple tree gave the sweetest fruit, and which was best for cider. This was intimate, place-based knowledge. But then, 1939. Then, 1941. The gears of global total war began to turn, and this is where our story takes its first sharp, irreversible turn. You see, modern war isn't just fought by soldiers with rifles. It's fought in factories. It's fought with steel, rubber, aluminum, and oil. And critically, it's fought with calories. An army, as the saying goes, marches on its stomach. But a global army of millions, plus the tens of millions of factory workers supporting them, needs an unprecedented, almost unimaginable amount of food. Suddenly, the demand wasn't for a diverse local diet. It was for bulk. Massive, shippable, storable, efficient calories to fuel the war machine. Wheat for bread to feed millions. Corn and potatoes for starch. Canned vegetables for the troops overseas. The subtle, complex needs of the family farm were replaced by the blunt, simple demands of the quartermaster. And all those factories making tanks and planes? They needed workers. They offered good, steady wages, a powerful lure for families who had just endured the hardships of the Great Depression. So, what happened? A great migration began. It was one of the largest, quickest movements of people in history, a silent hollowing out of the countryside. Young men, the traditional muscle of the farm, left for the front lines. And their sisters, their brothers, their fathers even, left for the shipyards of Portland, the aircraft plants of Detroit, the munitions factories of Ohio. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just a poster girl. She was a farmer's daughter from Iowa who now wore coveralls and worked a lathe, her skilled hands that once churned butter, now assembling bombers. The countryside was being drained of its lifeblood, its labor, its youth, its future. Back on the farm, the remaining population, often older men, women, and young children, faced an impossible equation: produce more food than ever before, with a fraction of the manpower. It was a national emergency on the home front. Government stepped in with a force never before seen. In the United States, the Department of Agriculture became a kind of command center. They set guaranteed high prices for key war commodities: wheat, corn, cotton, pork. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a patriotic and economic imperative. The message was clear: plant fence post to fence post. Plow up your pastures. Forget crop rotation. Forget the clover that feeds the soil. Grow what the war needs, and grow it now. And for the public, you know about rationing. Sugar, coffee, meat, butter, canned goods. You needed little stamps in a book to buy them. It was a daily, tangible reminder that the war was everywhere, even in your pantry. To fill the gap, victory gardens became a patriotic duty. Everyone, from movie stars in Hollywood to school children in Brooklyn, was encouraged to turn any patch of soil, backyards, parks, window boxes, into a food source. At their peak, these small gardens produced nearly 40% of the fresh vegetables in the United States. It was an incredible, decentralized effort. But it also reinforced a new idea: that food was a national resource, a weapon of war, to be managed, directed, and maximized for strategic ends. The traditional farm, that self-contained, resilient unit, was suddenly plugged into a national grid. Its success was measured not by the health of its soil or the well-being of its family at the end of the year, but by its tonnage, its abstract contribution to the quartermaster's ledger. The farm was no longer a homestead. It was a production unit in a vast, continental factory. And so, the old, slow, careful methods, they just wouldn't do anymore. You couldn't wait for a team of horses when a tractor could do the work of 10. You couldn't rely on family labor that wasn't there. A sense of quiet desperation settled over the fields. The pressure was immense. The solution, it seemed, was waiting in the very factories that had taken the farmers' sons away. Technology. The answer had to be machines. Bigger, faster, more powerful machines. But this shift, this turning point from muscle to machine, from biodiversity to monoculture, came with a cost. It wasn't just about tractors. It was about the chemicals that would soon follow, born from the same wartime industries. It set the stage for a revolution that would outlast the war itself. A revolution that would change the color of our landscapes, the taste of our food, and the very fabric of rural life. The old-timer I mentioned? He'd just shake his head and say the war didn't just end in 1945 for everyone. For the way he knew, for the farm he grew up on, the harvest was already over. The silence that followed was the sound of a new world being born.